Hello everyone, welcome to my Late Age Dominions 5 tier list. So this is going to follow the same trend as my previous two tier lists. I'm going to rank all the nations in the vanilla version of Dominions 5 Late Ages. Again, I am not a Dominions 5 expert. I would say it's even generous to claim that I'm an intermediate player, and everyone loves to give their opinion. So I'll have a link to this tier list maker in the description so you can make your own. So let's begin with S-rank nations, nations that I believe are so good that they are head and shoulders above all the other nations in Dominions 5 and can carry a game basically on their own. So number one is Lemuria, and it's not even close. The power gap between, honestly, Lemuria, you can put them at SS tier. They have like all the strengths of Middle Age Ermor and Celeria fused together. They're pretty strong. If you want a real dissection of them in depth, you can watch Purin's video on what he believes the best nations in the game are. They have so many other stupid broken gimmicks to work with. Speaking of stupid broken gimmicks is Late Age Ulm, who have a Blood Zero spell that lets them summon an immortal, extremely powerful vampire. Yeah, even outside of that vampire, the nation has a lot of great magic, astral, blood, death. They can summon vampires who break them into death pretty hard, and death and blood are, as far as I'm concerned, the best paths of magic in Dominions 5, so the fact that Late Age Ulm can get so many stupidly broken super combatant chassis out of the gate is just insane. And Ulma's troops aren't bad either. They have crossbows and they've got lots of blood. They also have pretty decent units across the board too. They've got good cavalry, but they're very good sacreds. It's really their blood summons that carry them, I think, to this high level. And Raga is a conceptually very cool nation about a dual kingdom between cold and hot. You have these Abyssians and these Kalianites. Kalianies? Raga's heat side is just so much better than their cold side. I recall one of the very first games of Dominions 5 I played was a Late Age Disciples game, because I was still learning how the game worked, so I figured I'd play on a Disciples team. And just the sheer amount of bullshit that Late Age Raga can spew out is immense. Like, they have so many summons that the amount of, like, magical diversity they have is ridiculous, but on top of that, they just have sacred units that are insane, and they really help Raga get a very good expansion, and that helps them transition into either a strong mid-game or a unfathomably powerful late game should you let them just fester. It is possible to mess with Raga if you could cast like Breath of Winter on their capital, I guess, then they can't recruit their sacreds anymore. The inappropriately named Midgard is still, as their early age and middle age counterparts is very strong. They're still an air blood nation, although now they have some human commanders that inject a lot of extra magic diversity. Vettiheim are still here in Midgard, so you still have insane elfin capabilities. So Midgard, I think, is pretty insane. Blood and death are just such a crazy path of magic. So speaking of nations that are super strong in death, we have Late Age Atlantis, and this is definitely the most powerful incarnation of Atlantis. They have very good units. Late Age Atlantis is the second nation I played in Dominions 5. Because I like their theme, and they're pretty good. Their ice units, their ice protection makes expansion very easy. They have really strong mages that can go into communions, and you can get a lot of different stuff in communions. Yeah, sort of as Late Age Atlantis, you can have a really, really good early game. That's sort of a trend that all of these S-tier nations hold, is that their early game expansion is just so freaking easy. It's like, you can't screw it up, really. It's brain dead. And with Late Age Atlantis, you could get to have the privilege of going underwater. And should there happen to be another aquatic nation in the game, you will just curb stomp them. And once you get underwater, you get communions. Anyway, so on to the A-tier nations. So to start, we have Utgard, Utgard has, following the trend, very good blood, very good death, and their death is in a communion, so they can get really high into that. So basically they have all the sorcery paths, they have really good sacreds. So yeah, you have excellent mages, and you have excellent sacreds. The problem is the rest of your unit roster is basically still Jotuns, and Jotuns are alright, but they're... I don't like them. I don't like Jotuns very much. I think their shock weakness is a horrible nerf. Anyway, super strong. I mean, like, really beefy, hard-hitting, lots of magic diversity, lots of good stuff. And next we have Micklin, who have returned to their blood roots. As far as I'm concerned, late age Micklin is largely the same power level as early age Micklin. The issue is just the other nations have gotten a lot of blood themselves, and crossbows are way more prolific in the late age, so not having shields is sort of just like a horrible curse. Like, you can still make Jaguar Warriors, and they're still really strong, and, you know, for expansion they work good. You can still make your Ocelotls with their ridiculous attack density, and cut up everything, and you can even contest underwater. They can send blood mages underwater. And the later the game goes, you can even get death in your communions too. So they've got all the good paths of magic. I really just think their troop lineup it struggles a lot with crossbowmen. And not only are crossbowmen going to be more commonplace with the other nations, like the rest of the nations in the roster, but also independent provinces are just going to be using crossbowmen a lot more often. And next we have Pangaea, who is, they are finally unseated from their S tier. If you watched my Jomon game, the very first one I uploaded on this channel, I played against a very good Pangaea player, but late age Pangaea is still very strong. I mean, they still have a lot of the good stuff that the early forms of Pangaea have, and now they have crossbowmen. But unfortunately, late-age Pangaea, they don't have centaurs as their sacreds anymore. They've been replaced with dryads, and the dryad hoplites are alright. They've got awe, they've got formation fighter, but they're using bronze armor in the late age, which is embarrassing. Their attack density, even with formation fighter, is still not producing as many attacks as white centaurs would. So basically their early game brain dead sacred killing power is a lot worse. But the inclusion of crossbowmen is a boon. They're also just using a lot more armor in general. Like, you know, they still have seducing dryads. They still have a lot of positives. I don't want to undermine those. And then next in my list is Archicephali, who this is by far the most powerful incarnation of Archicephali in Dominions 5. Late Age Arco has a lot of magic diversity. They can very easily get Astral, that's always in the cards, but they can also get Nature, Death, Earth, Fire, Water. I mean, really the only thing they can't get that's of note is Air and Blood, but they've got the best troops Archicephali's ever had. They've got good prices on their infrastructure, they've got better mages. They don't have crossbows, which is lame, but in terms of getting into blood, they can summon curs, and they can Gift of Reason them, so they can, like, gimmick their way into blood that way. Archicephali Late Age also has one of the best cavalry options, I think, in the game. And that's not to say that the companion cavalry is not going to be, like, beating a Zaiden in a 1 versus 1, but for the gold, like, they only cost 35 gold, and you can recruit them anywhere. The horse companions that Archicephali can make are great. Like, their stats, what you're paying for, is amazing. It's fantastic just how much value you get out of only spending 35 gold. They have a very high defense skill, even accounting for their shield parry. Bogarus is pretty cool. They've got a lot of the special wacky summons that the earlier Russians also had, but now they have just a plethora of magic options. Like, they've got death, they've got air, they've got blood, so magically they're pretty much covered, but just their troop lineup is just kind of like okay, and their sacred units are, you know, fine. They also do not have crossbowmen. So that is not a plus for them. Next on my list is one of the newer nations in Dominions 5. It is Vettiheim. So the problems of Vettiheim, I'll just get them out of the way. They're size 1 goblins, so they can get pretty messed up by area of effect spells. But outside of that, Vettiheim has some of the coolest units and mages, I would say, in the game. The fact that they can recruit their hags on any forest for 40 gold, I think is ludicrous. And they've got really great death, and they've got pretty good blood as well with their Gijas. And it's not like Vettiheim's normal units are bad either. They're really cheap goblins, and some of them are super duper killy. Like Wolf Brothers, wolf riding goblins, those guys are insane. Just the amount of attack density that they can output, their stats, it's crazy how cheap they are. And they're stealthy too, so you can actually elf people as Vettiheim. So we really are the chosen people. Now, Gath has a plethora of human troops to work with. They even have giants. They still have giant units that can go around and clear out indies with relative ease. They've brought back the blood from the early ages, thank Yahweh. And they have death. They do have death. Excellent summons, great magic, a good early game. I would just say, like, their magic is sort of outclassed by nations higher up on the tier list than them. So that's A tier. Just to clarify, I think all the nations that I've listed so far are extremely strong. I think they're really, really great. I just want to point out that the distinction really between S and A tier is S tier have no flaws at all. Like, if they have any flaws, they're so minor that they're really negligible, or they can be overcome with other factors. Whereas the A tier nations, they kind of all have like one deficiency or another. Maybe it's not necessarily like a major deficiency, you know, it's not like late age Arco has a crippling disability that just kneecaps them super badly, but it's like, you know, a combination of small things like not having assassins, not having good access to blood. That's the sort of thing that hurts Archicephali from being S tier, for example. So as we move into the B tier nations, these are just nations that I feel have a slightly greater weakness. So the king is Agartha, late age Agartha. So late age Agartha, they lose their statues, but they get some other pretty cool summons for their death gems. They have a tremendous amount of crossbow spam that they can pump out. Really, the worst thing about late age Agartha is you don't have your statues anymore, so you kind of have to rely on your drakes, your cave drakes, your drake knights, cave knights, whatever, for expansion, and those guys are very expensive. It's very painful to lose them. They're nowhere near as squishy as a troglodyte. For expansion, Agartha actually has a pretty easy time if you abuse those, but they have a real lack of magic diversity. They're really earth and death, and that's what they do best. They have a bit of fire and water with their alchemist. They don't have a lot of magic diversity. Their human troops aren't that great. So late age Satis has a really weird, I'll talk about the bad thing first, has a really weird cap only mage that's death 1, fire 1. I don't know if it's involved in some sort of like events, or yeah, if you can like use it for some gimmicky thing like unexpected events or whatever, but on its own it may be like the worst cap only mage in Dominions 5. The only thing special it can do for you is cast Banefire Dart. But late age Satis is actually a bit like Lemuria, or perhaps Celeria, in that they have Reanimator Priests. So they can get a huge amount of lizard skeletons to back them up. The problem is those Reanimator Priests cost death gems to make, and Satis doesn't start with any of them. If given enough time and enough death gems, you can spam out a massive army of skeletons. It's just never going to be as good as Celeria's, because you're not spending gold to make cultists, you're spending death gems. Also, you still have bad Satisian troops. Yeah, I mean, Sorrowmancers are an excellent mage, and they carry the nation. Next is Late Age Abyssia. So Late Age Abyssia, they have a lot of different assassin options, And, I mean, recruiting a 90 gold Holy One assassin that actually has some, like, good gear is pretty ridiculous. I would say it's really just a matter of the fact that Abyssians are really just outclassed by other units because they have a gold hike on their units to pay for their heat aura, and they're also super resource intensive. It's just kind of hard to play Abyssia. Like, you just never have that many options. Your magic is so limited. But hey, Blood is really strong. So Blood can carry a nation that has otherwise somewhat unremarkable mages and unremarkable troops, even expensive troops. So next we go to the Barbarian Kings leading Tianqi. They have quite a bit of magic to work with. They've got pretty high death, good enough earth magic. They can get very high air in their communions. So they've got a lot of important paths to magic. Their troops are unfortunately still Tianqian guys, and for some reason they lose their crossbowmen that they had in the Middle Ages. To clarify why crossbowmen are good, it's because protection values have just gone up across the board with all nations in the late ages. So you need crossbows to penetrate that extra armor. So if you don't have crossbows, if you're still using normal bows, your overall damage output is going to be worse. Their sacred is fine. I think it's overcosted, and their units aren't very good. Solidly B tier. So all these nations B tier can absolutely win the game. You can definitely win the game with all these nations, and I don't think you're particularly crippled. Late Age Xibalba has basically all the same broken summons that they've always had. You can do anything you want magically with them. You just need to summon out their units, and that's kind of tough. Late Age Xibalban units still have some frogs from their Middle Age version, and they are still not wearing helmets, so they're still very vulnerable to crossbows, and Zots are still very squishy, ineffective troops, and they're made even more ineffective by the overall increase in protection, as they still have very low strength. So expansion with Late Age Xibalba is very taxing. So a nation that is almost in exactly the same vein as Xibalba is Calum, who have a lot of great summons that give them, like, basically all the magic paths in the game, and the later the game goes, the more of them you're going to get, so the stronger you're going to become, right? The problem is Calum is still using Spirehorn warriors from the early ages, and I mean, they're efficient. They've got lances, but their sacreds still blow, like, unless you're doing some really mimetic protection buff, like hard scan or something for your sacreds, and you're going to make them unkillable juggernauts with like 30 protection or something. And most of your recruitable units suck. Late Age Phlegra has lost a lot of what made Middle Age Phlegra really good, but it's also got some cool stuff in return. So you still have your shackled mages, and you can still do your non-astral communions, which is cool. It gives you more value to your non-astral mages, and also makes them a little more protected because you don't have to worry about astral dual spamming. Although you actually do, because your oppressor archons are going to be low in astral, and you're not going to have an effective astral screen for them, so actually astral dual still would screw you over in that way. But let's just say you're not using them, which of course you should use them, because they give you super high elemental power in a battle. You have some cool units, you have some neat summons, but don't get me wrong, the communion power that you can put out with Phlegra is pretty intense, and their units, a lot of them are slaves, so you're paying a pretty excellent price. And finally, the big ticket item that Phlegra has is the Sleeping Tyrants. So eventually, a mountain will explode and you'll get like this crazy bonkers super combatant chassis. Late Age Man. Late Age Man has, they have stealthy, very high protection, crossbow wielding sacreds. They can get into death with their summonable banshees. Default magisters are air 2s, so they can do, storm stuff, I guess. They also have decent cavalry. Okay, so it's like expansion with Late Age Man is hard. Their foresters are cool with all their extra attacks, but they cost a premium. But it's sort of like just man doesn't have a lot of variety. You're sort of just going to be pumping out Magister Arcanes constantly, and you can't even put your Banshees in your communions. Late Age Man has good death, which is strong. They have assassins who are death mages. That's really great. Look, I mean, there's sort of just an overall like decent nation that they don't do anything particularly amazing. So these guys are actually really freaking cool. Astral mages with them, and you can even go underwater and get some of like basically you can get the best parts of Pelagia in your country, so you can start doing the pearl cultivation thing that Pelagia can do. Except on top of that, you also have like units that are decent on land and can like expand. I will say their sacred is not very impressive. It's kind of okay, but I would say it's a little expensive for what it is. So now we have the start of the C tier nations, and all these ones, they have good sides. All of them have like some positive, some cool, neat thing that helps them. But they either have like a crippling, extremely exploitable weakness, or they just have like a lot of minor deficiencies. So the first, and definitely undeservedly because they're Japanese, is Jomon. They finally got rid of those disgusting, horrible Oni and those disgusting, horrible Bakemono shows, and now we just have the wonderful Bushido samurai ruling the fractured lands of Jomon. But unfortunately, Jomon units do not use shields. And much like the other nations that don't use shields, that's a pretty horrendous weakness. They're going to get pelted to death by crossbows. However, your best mage, the Onmyoji, is slow to recruit, so you're never going to get that many of them. You're never going to have a big enough communion to compete with other big astral nations like Phlegra or Vettiheim, for example. So your communions are always going to be kind of lacking. Your sacreds suck. They're literally drunk salarymen straight out of Osaka. Your master Shugenjas are some of the most overcosted and like useless mages in Dominions 5. And they're totally like based off of RNG, whether they're actually good or not. Also, Jomon gets their best mage underwater, the Ryujin, so you have to get underwater as this nation to really function effectively, and there's so much underwater competition that is better than you that it makes it even more aggravating. What does Jomon have? Jomon has like maybe kappas that they've summoned, or mercenaries that they've hired, or like indie mermen, and that's what they're working with. The game can become very hard without water access. Now, with a lot of Ryujins, Jomon becomes very, very strong. It's actually a amazing power spike when you can start pumping out 3-4 Ryujins every single turn because you have so many forts. You've palisaded and castled up every single water province that you possibly can, and you're producing these super efficient underwater troops and mages that really outshine your on-land ones. And next is Pythium. So, my oh my, have the Romans fallen. Now, granted, Pythium has a lot of access to a lot of different magic paths. It's all just in very, very low levels. They need RNG to roll into their astral. If they don't have big communions, then their death mages kind of suck. And their troop lineup is fine, I guess. They have like recruit anywhere stuff that seems decent. The troops that they can recruit in their capital are like humans, except they're extremely expensive humans. No, I think the nation just like really sucks. Like it's struggling to survive at this point. Pythium's sacred, the serpent cataphract, is just not very good. It's for what you're paying. Yeah, I mean, I think the nation just really lacks a mid-game power spike. They've got decent nature, and they can do foul vapors, but their human troops are just going to kill themselves on that, so that's a little tricky to work out. They don't excel at anything. really, at all. They excel at, like, literally nothing. Speaking of a nation that excels at nothing is Merinon. So let's quickly review the positives of Late Age Merinon. So most importantly, they have blood. However, there are a plethora of nations that do blood better than you. They have crossbows. They have sailing, which is neat. A flatulence, still, that they can recruit. But the other Marinese sacred is a embarrassment. Like, the Palace Guard guy thing is just completely garbage. Yeah, I think it's the worst sacred in Dominions 5. The amount of gold that you're spending on it and what it's giving to you is just so rancid. So blood, blood can do a lot. Blood can carry a nation beyond the complete bottom of the barrel. And they have a late game. They have a late game where they can win. It's just their units aren't very good, and their magic is sort of limited. You have no idea how much joy it gives me to put Patala, this disgusting dirt nation, at the bottom. Patala has a lot of earth and water magic, and rarely they can get astral into communions with those. More often than not, their communions are going to consist of astral in nature. They have very little magic diversity to work with. They can summon into some cool stuff like air and death and blood, but that stuff is very late game. So before then, you're going to have to work with Patalan troops, which are extremely bad, and the Nagas are good. The Naga sacreds are not great, just kind of good. Like the hypnotize thing, poison spit, a bunch of attacks. It's good. It's solid. It just really doesn't save the horrendous troop lineup, like really icky, just nasty Bandars, who are horrible units. But still, Patala has a late game. Patala has summonable potential that can increase their magic diversity, and they can generate really big communions. All these nations that I've listed here, they realistically all have a way to win. Like, even the C-tier nations, which are, being held back by something or another, they still have a path. There's still a way to win with them. There's no way to win with Relay. There's no hope. They have a lot of the positives from Middle Age Relay. They still have their assassins. They still have their meteorite guard. But now they have a lot of competitors in the water. And they're not going to beat any of those competitors in the water. None of them. The only one they could realistically beat is Jomon before they get their forts up, which still isn't really reasonable if the lake is big enough. And frankly, Jomon just needs one fort, and then they beat Relay underwater. I mean, freaking Jomon even has, like, void insanity protection on their shrimp troops, which is like, oh my god, Relay Late Age has enough problems already dealing with the other water nations that the only one they could conceivably beat also has a counter to them. Anyway, Late Age Relay has a dominion that kills their population, and their free spawn units that they get are some of the worst free spawn units in the game. They even embarrassingly cost upkeep. And yeah, I mean, they have they have high astral. They have horrible priests. Oh, that's another thing. Patala has horrible priests. Like, off capital, they still, like, Bandar Log have the crappy priest one guy that sucks. Relay also has terrible priests. Relay has terrible everything. This nation sucks. This nation is completely unplayable, totally garbage. Use Bane Venom Charms to kill off the free spawn as Late Age Relay. Summon a Shade, slap a Bane Venom Charm on it, put it in a province that you don't care about, and herd all your free spawn to that location. Thank you, Rick Kahn, for that lovely comment. Perhaps that's a way to make the nation playable before your income drains to zero. So that is it. That is my Late Age tier list. Yeah, unfortunately, I think Late Age really lacks a lot of content. There is a big deficit of nations in the Late Age, which I think is unfortunate because Late Age has a lot of cool potential that I think is really untapped. If you liked this video, feel free to join my Discord and we can talk about it, or if you didn't like the video, you can join my Discord and whine about how this video sucked. As I said, I'll link the tier list maker in the description, so if you want to make your own and post it in my Discord, you can do that too. And if you want to see more videos like this, or just me making more Dominions content in general, I have a Subscribestar link in the description if you care to donate. Otherwise, thank you all for watching, and I hope this was helpful.